When I'm filming this, it's still winter, but the plum tree in my garden is blossoming and it is sunny for the first time after like 2 weeks of rain, so I am definitely feeling the spring vibe. The first book on my list is This Other Eden by Paul Harding. This is a historical fiction story set at the turn of the 19th to 20th centuries about a group of people who live on an island in the United States. It is interspersed with letters and speeches from a conference on eugenics, and that is kind of the framing narrative. The people who live on this small island are most of them of mixed heritage ancestry, white ethnic immigrants and black people and indigenous people on this island, and they are also not educated people and very, very poor. So the idea of eugenics and good breeding and how that is going to affect the outcome of the lives of these people is hanging over the narrative. But a lot of the story is focused just being in the lives of these people on this small island in a very short novel. One of our characters is a painter and he gets the opportunity, he's a teenager and a painter, he gets the opportunity to go to the mainland to paint because they are going to clear this island. So what happens in the future, who can be saved from the inevitable destruction of the island, that is illustrated by the beginning by the talk of this flood that happened on the island 100 years ago. There are a lot of biblical references, and including one man called Ezekiel who carves biblical stories on the inside of bark. There are many references to ideas of paradise and the fall and sin and the floods, and overall it is just incredibly beautifully written, very poetic, very painterly almost. Every image, every scene, every vignette is very, very visual in a kind of impressionistic way. I think it's a great spring read because there is a lot of nature focus and also small, quiet, rural community focus. So there are afternoons of farming, fishing while standing knee deep in rushing water, which I think is something that is always lovely to read in springtime. It's also a very slow moving, character focused novel, and I think that is something that is lovely to read at this time of year, that kind of calming but also very melancholy feeling. I think a lot of these books have a kind of melancholy overtone that I personally associate with spring for some reason. Also on my list is On Beauty by Zadie Smith, which is an academic novel, so I know a lot of people would associate it more with the autumn time. Partly I think because it is an adaptation of Howard's End, which also I haven't got on my list but is quite a springtime novel for me. The story follows the Belzy family. The father is an academic and art historian who seems to hate everything. The mother is a black Floridian woman called Kiki, and they have 3 children, Jerome, Zora and Levi. In the beginning, Jerome has gone back to London to live with Howard's arch nemesis in the academic world, Monty Kipps, and has fallen for the daughter, only for that all to end in disaster. And then the Kippses end up coming to this New England town to teach in the same university. And so the interactions between these two families form the skeletal structure on which this fairly plotless novel hangs. I love Zadie Smith's writing. I think that she does such a great job of bringing characters to life who are fully realised and very human. She makes you affectionate even for their flaws, which I think is something that is really enjoyable to read. It's great at exploring the nuances in a very specific culture, the culture of academics and ivory towers, and the way that this affects the 3 children differently, and the 2 parents, the one who is an insider and the one who is an outsider, differently as well. Of course it covers Smith's usual topics, her ideas of race and class and gender and the intersections of those things, and also ideas of hypocrisy and what it means to be authentically black and have an authentically black experience, being outsiders and insiders at the same time, being the children of academics but being mixed race, being Londoners living in the United States, and also Howard's own past and his disconnect from the world in which he lives. It talks about affirmative action, tokenism, or the patronisation of people, I think, in a really interesting way. As I said, it is a very humorous novel, a very dry, witty novel with a strong narrative presence. Like, the narrator is very strong in that kind of classic novel way, and I really enjoy reading that. And I think that reading a long, like, funny, charming but thought-provoking read in the spring is also great. Another chunky book that I think is very spring-like is The Mermaid Mrs Hanock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. This is again historical fiction with a light kind of fantasy element to it, and it is about a man, Mr Hancock, who is a merchant and one day one of his captains returns with a mermaid. This is one of the curiosities of the 18th century in which it is set, which is then to be displayed for people to come and gawk at. And one of the places it ends up being displayed is in a brothel where our other protagonist, Angelica, is working. She's a sex worker who had left the brothel because she was being supported by a sugar daddy of the nobility who dies, and she falls on hard times after this and has to return to the brothel where she was essentially raised. And it is a big chunky slice of life 18th century novel, I suppose. It follows the interactions between these two people who come from very different ways of life, the ways that they view one another, and the way that society views them, the ideas of class, again, in 18th century England, and of decadence and beauty and the artifice that goes into creating that, and the kind of visceral, disgusting underbelly that underlies this artifice of beauty, whether that is because of like just the lack of indoor plumbing or because of the slave trade that is supporting this lavish lifestyle in London. This is another novel that has a very humorous tone and a lot of kind of ridiculous, chaotic set pieces, but overlying all of them is this melancholy tone, this idea of safety versus freedom and what it means to be kept. It looks at, again, class and race and gender and sex in a really interesting way, and it is so decadently written, so beautiful, but at the same time has this kind of disgust running underneath it that I think is really enjoyable. Like I said, that melancholy tone gives me springtime feelings, but also a lot of this is like Marie Antoinette's her like little fake rustic village that she had at Versailles. There is that kind of artifice going on, and this kind of faking the idea of nature within the middle of the city, and also this sort of beginning of industrial revolution and commodification of nature, all of those which I think are themes that are great for reading about at springtime. Another melancholy one is My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. This is again very slow moving and focused on character and also an idea of storytelling. It follows our main character Lucy Barton as she is reminiscing about a time when she went into hospital, which was the only time that her mother visited New York, where Lucy Barton lives. And because her mother is visiting her in New York, she flashes back to her childhood as in extreme poverty in the Midwest and the trauma that she experienced there. Now, it sounds like it's going to be a big issue novel, but the way that it is done is with such light touch and such gentleness, are kind of lulled into a sense of security and a sense of comfort whilst reading this novel, despite the horrors that are gradually unfurled and be kind of indirectly, peripherally shown to you that you experience through Lucy Barton's words. Other characters are always through Lucy's perspective. She is telling you this story, and so the idea of structure and storytelling and perspective and what it means to be the protagonist in the story, I think is a very important part of this book. It is another short, slow-moving, melancholy novel, and for me that definitely sums up springtime. But this one is one that is deceptively simple, and so it feels very easy to read, very quick to read again, but there is so much going on, so much underneath it. I think if you like this other reading, you would also like My Name is Lucy Barton, even though they are not similar in terms of plot or themes. They are a little bit in terms of themes, but they are definitely similar in terms of tone and vibe, I would say. Another chunky one is the Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki. This one is set over the course of several years, so it is not set particularly in springtime, although I do think that this cover is quite spring-like. You can see all my tabs because we read this for the Big Book Club. It was actually the first book that we read at the beginning of last year. I read it with Matthew Chirappa, so I will leave that live show linked in the cards above if you would like to go and check it out. But this one is about 4 sisters in Japan in the 1930s who have been from a fairly well-to-do family, but who are falling on hard times, have less money, but that is kind of in the periphery, in the background. The eldest 2 sisters are married, and it is about the process of trying to get the 3rd sister married, because the 4th sister is trapped at home until the 3rd sister is married, because they are from such a traditional Japanese family. And so it kind of, you can feel the like Little Women and the Pride and Prejudice like resonances if you have read those classics. It is about Japan in the 1930s and the colonialism of Japan, and also the looming threat of war. I believe that the Sino-Japanese War begins in this book, as far as I remember. But everything seems to happen in the periphery, and the focus of this book is very much in small rooms and in family relationships and things between sisters. There is a big focus on beauty and aging and illness, and decay. This family is falling on hard times, they can't upkeep their houses, and also the illnesses of the characters in them are a big part of it. There is also a focus on gender and the strictures and the ways that society is limiting these women, and the ways that they choose to act out in regards to that. It is an idea of traditional Japan versus incoming modernity through the different sisters as well. And there is also a lot of nature in this book. There are scenes during cherry blossom season, scenes during storms and floods, scenes during fireflies in the summertime as well. And so it has beautiful nature to it. And again, it's quite a slow moving, character focused book with a lot of, it feels very episodic. I believe it was published episodically. But I think, yeah, the slow movingness, the character focus and the nature writing parts of this are what make it feel the most spring-like. More slow moving melancholy springtime novels now. We have Stillborn by Guadeloupe Nettel. This is set in Mexico City, and it is about two women who, when they are in their 20s, make a pact to each other that they will never have children, they never want to have children. And as they go into their 30s, one of them remains the same whilst the other decides she does want to become a mother. But her journey to becoming a mother doesn't go the way that she hopes that it will. The first half of the novel is about these two women and their relationship, and also our main character's relationship with her own mother, and then the second half of the novel is taken over by what happens when this baby is born who has severe disabilities and is told she's not going to last more than a few months. This is a novel about mothering, of course, and about what it means to be a mother and one's relationship with their own mother, and how we can support all of our relationships in this kind of nurturing maternal way. The idea of motherhood versus the reality of it, and what it means when the ideas that we have of what motherhood will be are changed and are never the same, and the ways that the world is made smaller and brought to more stillness. Again, it is very character focused and really explores that our main character, her relationships and how they are altered by this big life-changing event, and explores ideas of hope and happiness and how we continue when everything has been shrunk so much smaller. It is a really kind of stripped, pared back writing, very simple and very plain, but I think it really works for the themes that it is covering, and it is, again, as I've said, very sad and very still. Sad in a very slow, melancholy way rather than a big over-the-top dramatic book. Despite the topics that it is covering, it is not a dramatic book, but it is a very moving one nonetheless. So it seems so far I have two types of books here, which is big chunky saga kind of books and small short quiet books. For another big chunky saga type book, we have Middlemarch by George Elliot. This is set in the early 19th century. It is about a town of Middlemarch and several of the characters there. Dorothea, who is a very passionately religious woman who is living with her uncle and who becomes obsessed with Casaubon, who is a very religious older man who she decides she must marry. Also his nephew, who is passionate and an artist and impulsive. Dorothea's younger and much more conventional sister, and her uncle, who is in politics but very easily swayed. He's a very funny comic character. And these are the characters of the big house of this town, but we also have the more middle class characters in the town. The town's new doctor, who is very scientifically minded and who is butting up against the more traditional ways of doing things, and he falls in love with a very beautiful but very princessy kind of a girl. Their ideas perhaps of what one another and what marriage would be don't necessarily align. And also we have that girl's brother, who is a gambler and a degenerate essentially, and his relationship with this other family who have supported him and who he has really taken advantage of. It is about town versus country and the urbanisation of England at the time, the change in science and in understandings that were causing a rapid change in society that people wanted to stop and slow down because people are ever the same, and also the romantic movement of the time period and the passion versus practicality as well are big parts of the novel. And so because of those clashes and those ideas being played out in this small comic intimate way, this very much a novel of drawing rooms and of people, I think that's what makes it a spring novel for me. It is not tempestuous or over the top. It is very personable and person focused. And again, like I said, there is rural versus urban, there is nature and the change of the world, which is very much a springtime theme. Next we have Little by Edward Carey, which is the story of Madame Tussaud during the French Revolution. And so it tells the story of this woman who is from her birth to her death, I think, and it is of her being, she was very small, that's why it is called Little. And after her parents die, she becomes apprenticed to a wax sculptor, which is how she ends up on her path to becoming the Madame Tussauds that we know. So she ends up going to Versailles and being part of the court there, and then also becoming more embroiled in the French Revolution, and because a lot of people are losing their heads and she sculpts wax heads, that becomes part of her world. It is a comic novel. There is a lot of humour in it in a very kind of dark, whimsy kind of Edward Carey way. Like if you're a Tim Burton fan, you probably would be an Edward Carey fan as well. It has the same weirdness in a whimsical, slightly twee way, but it's a tweeness that I can enjoy. And it is, again, following a big moment in history from a very small perspective, a very little perspective. But it has the kind of grossness to it, a darkness, a very physicalness to it. And again, I think of spring as a season of mud, a very muddy season. And this is a very muddy book when we are dealing with the disgusting nature of the court at Versailles and also the blood, guts and mud of the French Revolution. It is a book that is set in the rain for the most part. And so that is one of the reasons that makes me think of spring, alongside this whimsy, this focus on strangeness, I think are very spring-like moments. It is also, as all of Edward Carey's books are, full of illustrations that are, you know, slightly odd, slightly macabre, and overall just bizarre in a very, very fun way. So I think this is a very enjoyable novel, even though, again, it deals with darker things, has elements of tragedy and of moving moments alongside this general dark twee. In a similar vein, though entirely different genre, we have The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne M Valente. I don't read a huge amount of middle grade, but I do enjoy some of it, and that's what this is. I think middle grade that can be enjoyed by an older reader who enjoys kind of whimsical fantasy with a kind of melancholy, darker edge to it. This is about a girl who is during the Second World War in the United States, eventually one day gets swept up by the west wind and deposited in fairyland, and has to travel through fairyland in a very traditional fairy story kind of way, has to find her way home, can't eat the food or else she'll be stuck in fairyland forever, meets with a lot of traditional fairy tale characters and fairy tale motifs and elements. And it is witty and fun and whimsical and very, very enjoyable. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Phantom Tollbooth, that travelling around a world and that humorous take on traditional stories and kind of a lot of puns and silly moments and very beautifully described moments as well. It is definitely a book for you if you like flowery, over-the-top, very verbose writing. It is not for you if you prefer simple, clean prose, because it definitely is not that. But I think that lent to the whimsy of it and the prettiness of it. And again, that whimsy with a slightly darker turn, that adventure story, I think, for me, reads very springtime. It is fairies, and fairy stories tend to be very associated with nature. Fairies are like the natural world and the traditional rustic world. And so I think that for me, they represent that. And it's just a lot of fun, a very, very whimsical, fun read, in case that's what you were looking for. The final book on my list is a coming-of-age story, but entirely different from the last one. That is Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangerembga, which is a Zimbabwean book, and it's the first in a trilogy. And it is about a young girl, well, it is kind of auto-fiction, but it is about a young girl in Zimbabwe in the, as it is becoming independent, who lives in a kind of slightly rural place, and she is not going to get an education, which she always wanted, until her brother dies. And so after her brother dies, she is taken by her uncle, who lives in a bigger town, and becomes able to go to school. And it is about her receiving an education, but also the changing in Zimbabwe at the time, the changing kind of social mores, but also the very turbulent political period that is about to begin as there is a fight for independence. There is a lot of small violence and brutality in this book, and a lot of like colonial racist violence, but also interpersonal, interfamilial violence. Again, a kind of slow, quiet, very still book where these moments peek through but are not super over the top or dramatic. It is very a clear book in terms of the writing and in terms of the narrative. It follows a very simple narrative and it is written in a very simple style, but I think it works really well. I enjoyed the naivety of the narrator and the perspective of this book, the way that it allowed this very clear-eyed but very simplistic look at what was going on at the time. And I think it's a really brilliant book, and coming of age stories like this for me again also remind me of springtime, that idea of growth. I have done a video like this before where I recommended other books for springtime, so if you're looking for more I will leave that linked in the card above. Please do let me know what you like to read in springtime in the comments down below and what books you would recommend. I'm always looking for more recommendations. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you're new here, my name is Roisin. I put out new videos every Tuesday and Friday, so please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.